On May 7th, the afternoon was calm.
In the small town of Bel Air, Ohio, everything suddenly changed in 2017. David Kinney, along with his wife Sherry and their young daughter, went to visit his close friend Brad McGarry.
They had a simple task in mind: returning a weed trimmer.
However, as they approached the house, something didn't feel right. No one answered the front door, and a growing sense of unease took hold of the family. The family felt a sense of worry take hold.
David led them around to the back, where they found the service door slightly open.
Inside the house was a mess, with clear signs that something had gone terribly wrong. Sherry called out for Brad, but there was only an eerie silence in response when Brad didn't answer. David decided to check the basement.
What he found David Kinney was a young man with an ordinary life. At the age of 21, his mother threw a big celebration in his honor. Among the guests was Sherry, a beautiful single mother who attended with her sons. During the course of the evening, David found himself deeply captivated
by Sherry. He felt an instant connection. The next day, he told his mother he'd found the love of his life and was going to make his relationship with Sherry official.
Some people in David's circle questioned his decision to marry a woman with 3 young children, citing the heavy responsibility.
David was a young man full of commitment and love. He was ready to take on the responsibilities that came with integrating into Sherry's family and building a beautiful life together. He was determined to ensure he could provide for his new family.
David enrolled in a course to become a coal miner, a tough and risky job, but he was prepared to do whatever it took to provide for his loved ones.
David was determined to make his relationship with Sherry official, despite some people in David's circle questioning his decision to marry a woman with 3 young children.
He was ready to take on the responsibilities that came with integrating into Sherry's family and building a beautiful life together. To ensure he could provide for his new family, David enrolled in a course to become a coal miner. It was during this training that he met Brad McGarry.
Brad was born in the 1970s in Cambridge, Ohio. He had faced numerous challenges growing up. He was openly gay in a conservative environment. Brad had endured insults and prejudice, but he had always stood firm in living his truth. Over time, he built a tight-knit group of friends and a career in hairstyling. Brad made the bold decision to switch careers, opting to become a coal miner despite the stark contrast to his previous work. David and Brad quickly became friends, with Brad becoming a beloved figure in David's family.
David's family included Brad, who was affectionately called Uncle Brad by David's children. The two friends were inseparable, sharing jokes and good times together.
By 2017, David was 30 years old, happily married to Sherry, and their children were growing up.
Brad, on the other hand, was balancing his work, family time, and a secret romance. On May 7th, in 2017, Brad informed a cousin at a family gathering that he needed to return to his home for a meeting later that day. Around 6:15 p.m., David, Sherry, and their youngest daughter stopped by Brad's house. They were surprised when Brad didn't answer the door, even though his car was parked outside. Concerned, they went around to the back of the house and found the service door unlocked.
After calling out to Brad without a response, David entered while Sherry searched upstairs. David went to the basement. There he found Brad's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood.
When Sherry heard her husband scream, she rushed downstairs and was equally shocked by the grim scene.
She immediately called 911, and the police were soon alerted to the discovery of Brad's body, the victim of a fatal gunshot wound. When the police arrived, they found David and Sherry. The couple was visibly shaken as they recounted how they had come to check on their friend and were met with a terrible tragedy.
They explained their close relationship with Brad, emphasizing the deep bond that had formed over the years.
The Kinney family shared that they often spent holidays with Brad, and their children loved him like an uncle.
They had even planned a trip to the Bahamas with him in August of that year. When asked about any enemies, David and Sherry also mentioned that Brad had recently ended a tumultuous relationship with a man named Scotty.
They described the relationship as fraught with conflict, with frequent heated arguments. After gathering as much information as possible from the witnesses, the officers began to thoroughly examine the scene before drawing any conclusions. In the basement, they found Brad's body was lying face down on the floor with a large pool of blood surrounding his head. It was clear that he had been shot at least once in the head. Despite the obvious signs, the officers initially speculated that Brad might have been going through a difficult time and possibly taken his own life. When the forensic expert arrived at the scene, he asked the officers if they had found a weapon. They replied that they had not. However, The forensic team quickly dispelled the initial suicide theory when they found no weapon on the body.
As they continued to survey the house, the police noticed that the house seemed to have been ransacked in a peculiar way.
The kitchen was in disarray with several drawers left open. The living room was also in a state of chaos.
The authorities initially suspected that Brad's death might have been the result of a robbery gone wrong.
However, after conducting a more thorough inspection, the detectives realized that no valuable items had been stolen.
Despite there being several items worth taking, they also noted that Brad was a collector of Royal-style art, and his home contained many valuable items. If the intruder had been a common thief, it would have been easy to steal the items of value. It was also odd that the television remained in place and there was money scattered on the floor. Given all these clues, the police were convinced that the robbery was staged to mislead them. Brad was an openly gay man working in a coal mine, so the detectives considered the possibility that he might have upset some of his more conservative co-workers, potentially leading to a hate crime. However, when they spoke with his colleagues, the detectives were surprised to find that everyone respected and admired Brad. They quickly discarded the theory that Brad was a victim of a hate crime. They also interviewed Brad's friends and family to establish a timeline and gather information. According to David and Sherry's statement at the scene, Brad had recently ended a toxic relationship with a man named Scotty. This was confirmed by Brad's friend Wendy. The police were told that she had also been against the relationship, noting that Brad had become too involved with Scotty and things had started to get very strange. The detectives obtained the full name of Scotty and immediately went to his house to question him. However, when they arrived, Scotty's mother informed them that he had been in jail for 3 months for violating his probation. This ruled out Scotty as the perpetrator, but the detectives did not completely dismiss him as a suspect. They theorized that he might have orchestrated the crime from behind bars with the help of an accomplice. The police visited Scotty in jail to inform him of his ex-boyfriend's death and gauge his reaction. Scotty seemed genuinely shaken by the news. By the end of the interview, the detectives had nearly ruled out his involvement in the crime.
Desperate for answers, the detectives decided to canvass. They immediately set out to see if any cameras in the neighborhood had captured footage near Brad's house. Fortunately, a neighbor had a camera facing the street close to Brad's home, which could potentially reveal who had come and gone. While they began reviewing the hours of footage, they continued interviewing friends and family. The case seemed to be reaching a dead end until 2 days later, when the detectives interviewed a cousin of Brad, whose testimony shifted the investigation. He revealed that on the day of the incident, Brad had left the family lunch gathering between 1:30 p.m. He also stated that Brad had mentioned that a man named DJ was supposed to visit his house. Furthermore, he added that Brad had jokingly said he was planning to take a nap with his guest, hinting at a romantic intention. He also disclosed that Brad had told her that the man he was seeing was married and that he had not yet come out to his wife about their homosexual relationship. He also informed the detectives that the relationship with DJ had been ongoing for years and that they had managed to keep it under wraps despite being reluctant to reveal the true identity of Brad's lover. However, he finally gave in under the pressure of the lead investigator, dropping a bombshell name. The officer was stunned to hear that DJ was actually David, the very man who had discovered Brad's lifeless body. He confirmed that David was, without a doubt, the only man Brad had ever mentioned to her. The detectives later commented that when they discovered DJ was David, the person who had found the body while visiting the house with his family, everything suddenly became clear.
Up until that point, David had been viewed as a significant witness in the case, appearing genuinely shaken and grieving over his friend's death.
This unexpected twist in the however, this immediately made him the prime suspect. The detectives, pretending to need photos from his phone related to the crime scene, convinced David to hand over his device. In reality, they were tracking his location during the time Brad was killed and searching for evidence that would confirm a relationship beyond mere friendship.
When they reviewed the phone's location data, revealed that David's phone had been at Brad's house at the time of the fatal shooting.
Despite David having deleted incriminating messages, a deeper forensic analysis uncovered text messages between him and Brad that confirmed their sexual relationship. Meanwhile, the team reviewing the footage from Brad's neighbor's surveillance camera found that David had indeed driven to Brad's house just before the estimated time of the attack. Notably, he had arrived in his wife's car, not his own. The police had enough evidence to prove that David had been at Brad's house both before and during the time of his death. It was time to confront him with the truth. When the detectives presented David with the damning data retrieved from his phone, he admitted to being at the house but changed his story multiple times during the lengthy interrogation, offering up to 7 or David gave 8 different versions of events. At one point, he claimed that a third unidentified man had been in Brad's house.
After a heated argument, this unknown individual shot Brad.
He insisted that the man had threatened him into silence before allowing him to leave. However, the detective made it clear that he didn't believe this story, prompting David to alter his account once again when pressed.
David eventually confessed to hiding his affair from his wife, Sherry.
He insisted that it had only been going on for a few months, not years.
He also claimed that Brad had not been pressuring him to leave his wife and move in together.
However, Brad had grown angry when David tried to end their romantic relationship that afternoon.
David alleged that Brad had brandished a gun, waving it in his face, which terrified him, told a different story. He said the argument escalated into a physical struggle, during which he managed to wrestle the gun away, shoot Brad in the forehead.
He asserted that he had acted in self-defense.
David also admitted to firing another shot at Brad while he was on the ground.
The detectives quickly refuted this version of events, pointing out that the basic laws of physics made David's account impossible. The forensic analysis of Brad's body revealed that he had been shot twice, both times in the back of the head. This indicates that the shooter had been standing behind him.
When asked about the weapon, David claimed he had disposed of it while fleeing the scene.
Law enforcement officers combed the area in the days that followed, but the murder weapon was never recovered.
Despite the missing weapon, the investigators were certain they had their man. Before taking David to jail, they allowed him to speak with his wife.
The detectives closely observed the conversation between David and Sherry.
David confessed to Sherry about the affair and expressed regret for not handling things differently. He admitted that he couldn't undo what had been done.
Sherry was shocked. The sheer enormity of his revelation left her speechless. David reiterated to her what he had told the detectives. Through tears, Sherry asked him if he was mocking her with such an explanation. She said she couldn't even bear to look at him. This conversation confirmed to the police that Sherry had no prior knowledge of the events that had transpired behind her back.
On May 15th, David was arrested and David was charged with first-degree murder.
Investigators were certain that Brad, frustrated with keeping their relationship a secret, had threatened to reveal the truth to Sherry. This gave David the motive to kill his friend and maintain his double life. After several days in custody, David appeared in court for a marathon preliminary hearing held in mid-May 2017.
He faced charges for the murder, but Brad kept his gaze fixed on the floor as the investigating officers testified and the prosecutor focused on the inconsistencies in the story. The told them to police described how David had appeared visibly distraught at the scene of Brad's murder, experiencing physical discomfort including trouble breathing and episodes of vomiting. He also recounted David's initial written statement. David claimed to be a simple friend who had gone to deliver a weed trimmer and had inadvertently discovered Brad's lifeless body in the basement.
The lead investigator presented David's final statement, in which he confessed to shooting Brad in self-defense with a weapon that, despite exhaustive efforts, was never found. The autopsy results were a critical turning point that completely dismantled David's self-defense claim. The victim, Brad, had been shot twice in the back of the head, which was inconsistent with an act of self-defense. David's defense attorney addressed the court, asserting that David did not pose a threat to society and that the tragic events leading to Brad's death were the result of unique circumstances. He further asserted that if a crime had been, it was not murder, but rather manslaughter. David acted in self-defense. David remained silent during the nearly 3-hour hearing where witnesses took the stand.
After reviewing all the evidence and testimonies, the judge found probable cause to send the case to the county court and set bail at $1 million. David's defense immediately requested a reduction in the bail amount, arguing that it was impossible for David to pay.
The judge denied the request. Several weeks later, David's defense attorney filed more than a dozen motions during a hearing.
Among these motions was another request to reduce David's bail.
Numerous friends and family members of David attended the hearing to show their support. The lawyer asked that the bail be reduced to $250. The Kinney family could manage that amount.
He called several witnesses to the stand, including David's wife, his mother, his father-in-law, and his stepfather. All of them testified to David's good character, describing him as an honorable, hard-working, and responsible man, as well as a loving husband and father.
Sherry testified that her husband had provided emotional and material support to their 3 children for the past 10 years, even though he was not their biological father. During cross-examination, Sherry was questioned about the events of May 7th, when David took her and their daughter to Brad's house.
She stated that her husband informed her they were going to return a weed trimmer.
When the judge inquired if her husband had acted strangely that day, Sherry asserted that she had not noticed anything unusual at the house.
She provided a detailed account of how they arrived, knocked on the door, found the back door open, and entered the house, which appeared to the house had clearly been ransacked.
David went to the basement and shouted for her to call 911.
After hearing all the arguments, the judge was unequivocal in his conclusion that the testimonies regarding David's character did not justify a reduction in bail. He based his decision on the fact that the defendant had taken his wife and daughter to a house where a dead body was present under the pretense that he was just passing by and was unaware of what had happened.
The judge added that David had blatantly lied to his wife and daughter.
The trial began and lasted for a week. During the trial, the prosecution presented the evidence we've already discussed.
This included the neighbor's surveillance video showing David arriving at Brad's house before the time of the crime and returning later with his family. The prosecution also showed police body cam footage that clearly demonstrated David had been lying from the start. One of the most striking pieces of evidence was a forensic expert testified about the DNA evidence found at the scene.
The expert revealed that DNA from a used condom showed Brad's DNA on the outside and the DNA of an unknown male on the inside.
However, there was no trace of David's DNA. This revelation was controversial because it contradicted the accusations made by a detective who believed that David had decided Brad had to die to keep his secret and his family life intact. The detective stated that David had lured Brad with the promise of sex, killed him, and then covered up the crime as best he could. The defense maintained that David had acted out of fear and in self-defense. However, the defense attorney admitted that David had not always told the truth and that some of his actions were odd. Nevertheless, the defense attorney asserted that this did not make David a criminal. The prosecution countered that 2 bullets to the back of the head were not acts of self-defense. The jury was told that Brad had been on his knees when he received the first shot to the upper part of his head and the second to the lower part of his skull. After hearing the closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. The courtroom was filled with tension as the jury returned. The judge read the unanimous verdict, finding David Kinney guilty of the aggravated murder of Brad.
The verdict was met with gasps and tears from those present. Before his sentence was handed down, David was given the opportunity to speak.
He began by apologizing to Brad's family for all the pain and suffering he had caused.
He said he never intended for any of this to happen and wished he could take it all back.
David acknowledged that no amount of apologies could ever bring Brad back, but he wanted the family to know that he truly regretted everything that had occurred. However, the judge was unmoved by David's apologies. The judge recounted the numerous lies David had told to cover up his actions and stated that the crime was a cold and calculated. David had premeditated Brad's murder.
He lured him with the promise of sex, set up the crime scene, and took multiple steps to conceal his crime. The judge had 4 sentencing options, all involving life imprisonment, but varying in the possibility of parole after 20, 25, or 30 years.
David's defense attorney urged the judge to choose one of these options, arguing that David had been a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record before the tragic events of that day. However, the prosecutor urged the judge imposed life without parole, emphasizing that Brad had lost his life and that his family would have to live with that loss forever. In response, the judge stated that if David was capable of ending the life of someone who loved him and was his best friend, it raised concerns about what he might do to someone who opposed him.
Therefore, he could not allow David to ever return to public life.
In February 2018, David was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole with an additional 3 years for a firearm specification, meaning he had possessed a weapon while committing the crime was a tragedy that could have been avoided if David had not been so concerned with keeping his homosexuality a secret.
As of mid-2023, prison records indicated that David remained incarcerated in Ohio from the moment of his conviction.
His attorney had tried to appeal the sentence, always seeking the possibility of parole for his client, but those appeals had been denied.
Tragically, while David would never return to the coal mines, Brad would not either, as both their lives had been irreversibly altered by David's actions.